She's holding up the line again." The woman's voice cut through the store like glass, but the man 3 customers back saw something no one else did. When he stepped forward, one act of kindness turned humiliation into history and a grocery line into a moment the whole town would never forget. Stay with us. What began with shame in a grocery line became a story of grace and strength. Because heartbreak can bloom into power when compassion takes root. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever rewritten your own story? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Black Stories Untold with Love, and ring that notification bell for more heartwarming stories that celebrate strength. The fluorescent lights hummed above the checkout line, casting a pale glow over faces that pretended not to see. Cathy Taylor stood among them, her fingers gripping a loaf of bread so tight the plastic crinkled. The line moved slowly, the air heavy with impatience and whispers. Her cart was small, half empty, filled only with what she needed to keep her little boy fed for another week. Bread, milk, baby formula, nothing more, nothing less. The cashier's voice was flat as she read the total. Cathy slid her worn EBT card across the counter, eyes lowered, praying the machine would beep and approve. But it didn't. A red light blinked instead, followed by that sound no one ever wants to hear in public. The decline. The cashier sighed, loud enough for the line to hear. Cathy's heart sank. She fumbled with the card, muttering that she could try again. The woman behind her laughed, sharp and gleaming like the diamonds that hung from her ears. Her perfume filled the air, heavy and sweet, choking the moment. The laugh grew louder, careless and cruel. It wasn't just amusement, it was power. She looked Cathy up and down, her smile tight, her tone dripping with judgment. The words came soft enough to sound casual, yet cold enough to cut. People like that shouldn't have children if they can't afford them. The sound of it clung to Cathy's skin like frost. Her cheeks burned. Eyes turned toward her and away again, each glance a silent verdict. She whispered that she was sorry, though she wasn't sure what for. Sorry for trying. Sorry for being seen. Sorry for being her. Further down the line, a man straightened. Owen Johnson. His face was calm, his posture quiet, but something inside him stirred like a storm breaking beneath still water. He was dressed simply in a wool coat and jeans, the kind of man who didn't announce himself. His eyes, pale and steady, watched as Cathy tried to gather her things, her trembling hands pushing the small pile of groceries aside. The cashier reached for the next customer. The sound of scanned items filled the air like static. Cathy turned to leave, her chin high, her pride forcing her to walk even as her eyes blurred. The laughter followed her, echoing in the back of her mind long after the voice had stopped. Owen stepped forward without a word. The line paused. The air changed. He placed his wallet on the counter and nodded toward the groceries left behind. The cashier hesitated, unsure what to do, but his gaze held firm. There was no speech, no grand gesture, just quiet resolve. Cathy froze by the sliding doors, confused. She saw the cashier bagging her things again, heard the beep of each item, and turned toward him. Their eyes met across the store, her wide with disbelief, his steady, almost soft. He didn't look away. The woman in diamonds shifted uncomfortably, her smirk fading as the people around her began to watch her instead. Her laughter died in her throat. When the bags were packed, Owen picked them up and walked toward Cathy, his expression unreadable. She stood still, unsure whether to run or to thank him. Outside, rain pressed against the glass doors, streaking the world into a blur of silver and gray. He handed her the bags without a word. Cathy opened her mouth, but nothing came. The only sound was the rain, steady and unrelenting. In that silence, something passed between them, something that had nothing to do with groceries or charity. It was the quiet understanding of two souls who had both been unseen for too long. The doors slid shut behind them, and the sound of the storm swallowed the world whole. The laughter lingered long after it was spoken, spilling through the aisles like smoke no one wanted to breathe. Cathy stood still, her hand frozen mid-air, her face stripped of all color. The woman's words floated behind her like an echo she couldn't escape. If you can't afford groceries, maybe you shouldn't have kids. The sentence struck harder than any slap could. It wasn't just cruelty. It was the sound of every closed door, every ignored application, every night she'd skipped her own meal so her child could eat. Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears made people uncomfortable, and when people got uncomfortable, they got crueler. She whispered a small sorry into the air, but it wasn't for the woman or the line. It was for herself, for her son waiting at home, for the version of her that used to believe the world was kinder than this. The diamond woman laughed again, a short, brittle sound that cracked through the quiet. A few people smiled nervously, unsure of where to look. The cashier shifted, pretending to be busy with the register. The store's radio hummed a happy pop song that felt obscene against the tension in the air. Owen Johnson had been watching from 3 customers away, a silent figure holding a carton of eggs and a bouquet of flowers that now felt absurd in his hands. Something inside him tightened, slow and heavy, as he looked at Cathy. Her shoulders were drawn in, her eyes fixed on the ground, her dignity hanging by a thread. The world had turned her invisible. He stepped forward, not out of pity, but out of something older and deeper, something that refused to let cruelty pass unchecked. His voice came quiet yet steady, cutting through the room like calm thunder. "Go ahead and scan those items again. All of them." The cashier looked up, startled. The line went silent. Even the music seemed to fade. Cathy blinked in confusion, her breath catching. She turned slightly, searching his face for mockery, but found only resolve. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't performing. He simply stood there, unshaken, his blue eyes holding hers with a kind of stillness that made her feel seen again. The diamond woman scoffed, muttering under her breath, but no one laughed with her now. A few heads turned toward her instead, eyes narrowing, the judgment redirected. For the first time, she seemed small under the weight of her own words. Owen slid his card across the counter, his movements slow, deliberate. The sound of the register came again, steady beeps echoing like a heartbeat. Cathy's groceries, her bread, her milk, her baby's formula, were bagged carefully this time, as if the act itself had become sacred. Cathy wanted to speak, to tell him he didn't have to do this, that she wasn't helpless. But her throat felt tight, full of things she couldn't say. Thank you would have been too small for what he had just done. Instead, she met his gaze one last time, letting the silence say everything. The laughter that had humiliated her moments before now hung in the air as a ghost of its former self, weak and weightless. And when Owen turned to leave, the people who had once looked away now looked at Cathy differently, not as the woman who couldn't pay for her groceries, but as the one who had stood tall through humiliation and was quietly reclaimed by grace. As she gathered her bags, Cathy felt the heat on her skin begin to fade. The shame had burned her, yes, but in its place something else began to stir, a fragile, unfamiliar thing. Hope. The sound of the cards sliding through the machine was the only thing that moved. The world around them seemed to freeze in place. Even the humming lights above grew quieter, as if the store itself was holding its breath. The diamond woman let out a sharp scoff that cracked through the silence. "A savior in disguise," she muttered, her voice dripping with the same venom that had filled the air moments before. But Owen did not flinch. He didn't speak. He didn't even look her way. He stood steady as the register beeped again and again, his eyes fixed on the groceries that had once been left abandoned on the counter. Bread, milk, formula, and then more. He nodded toward the shelves, telling the cashier to add fresh vegetables, a pack of diapers, a small roast chicken. The cashier hesitated, but one look at Owen's face made her move faster. There was no debate, no hesitation in his voice. It wasn't charity. It was something quieter, something stronger. Cathy stood there, her fingers trembling at her sides. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. She tried to speak, to tell him to stop, but the words tangled in her throat. She had spent her whole life apologizing for needing help. Now she couldn't even find her voice to accept it. Owen handed the receipt to the cashier and gathered the bags himself. The plastic handles stretched under the weight of his choices. When he turned toward her, Cathy's eyes filled. Her mouth opened, but only a whisper came. "I can't repay you." He shook his head slowly, his gaze steady and calm. "Some debts," he said softly, "aren't meant to be repaid. They're meant to be passed forward." The words landed between them like a promise, simple, unadorned, eternal. Behind them, the woman with the diamonds shifted uneasily. No one met her eyes now. The power she had drawn from her cruelty had dissolved, leaving only the sound of her own discomfort. For the first time, she looked small. The room had turned. The laughter that once mocked now lingered like shame. Cathy took the bags with careful hands, her fingers brushing his for only a second. That small touch carried more gratitude than any thank you ever could. Her chest felt heavy with something new, something she hadn't felt in years. Not pity, not debt, but dignity. Owen turned to leave, his figure tall and unhurried as he walked toward the door. The receipt fluttered in the cashier's hand, a small slip of paper marked with numbers that meant everything and nothing. As Cathy watched him step into the rain, her reflection stared back at her from the glass doors. The woman who had walked into that store broken was not the same one walking out. Her head lifted a little higher. Her steps grew steadier. The storm outside felt less like a punishment and more like a cleansing. Across the parking lot, Owen placed the remaining bag in the bed of his old truck. He paused, letting the rain wash over his face. The world didn't know it yet, but something small and extraordinary had just shifted. Not because of money or kindness, but because, for a fleeting moment, one human soul had seen another and refused to look away. And in that quiet act, the receipt became more than proof of payment. It became a record of grace. The rain began as a whisper, soft and hesitant, before turning into something steady and real. It painted the cracked pavement with silver, gliding down the windows, turning the parking lot into a blur of light and reflection. Cathy stood at the edge of it all, her arms full, her breath rising in small clouds. The grocery bags pressed against her chest like the weight of her own survival. Bread, milk, hope. Owen followed at a quiet distance. He didn't offer to carry her things. He didn't rush ahead to shield her from the rain. He simply walked beside her, steady and present, letting the silence breathe. The world around them blurred, but there was a stillness between them that felt almost sacred. Cathy's shoes splashed through puddles as she made her way to the bus stop. The night air smelled like wet asphalt and forgotten dreams. She hadn't meant to speak, but the words escaped her before she could stop them. "I work 2 jobs," she said it softly, as if confessing a secret to the rain. 2 jobs, and it's still not enough. Her voice broke, the truth slicing through the air like glass. Owen listened. Not the way most people do, half present and waiting for their turn to speak. He listened with his whole body, his gaze steady, his silence open. There was no pity in his eyes, only respect, the kind that sees without judgment, the kind that makes broken things feel less fragile. Cathy looked down, embarrassed by her own honesty. My husband died 3 years ago, heart attack. One moment he was here, the next he wasn't. Since then, it's just been me and my little boy. She gave a quiet laugh, tired and trembling. Some days I swear the world forgot we exist. Owen's steps slowed. The rain ran through his hair and down his face, but he didn't move to wipe it away. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice carrying something heavy and human. Not pity, understanding. He knew loss too, though his story was different. He didn't tell it. He didn't need to. They reached the dim glow of the bus shelter. Cathy set the bags down and wiped her face, though she couldn't tell if it was tears or rain. She turned toward him, her lips parting to speak, her heart caught between gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she said. The words felt small, almost broken. Owen shook his head gently. "You don't owe me gratitude," he said. "Only grace." The sentence settled between them like warmth in the cold. Grace. She hadn't heard that word spoken with meaning in a long time. It wrapped around her, quiet but sure, like a promise the universe had finally remembered to keep. The bus arrived with a hiss, its headlights slicing through the rain. Cathy gathered her bags and stepped onto the first step. For a moment, she looked back. Owen stood there, soaked and unmoving, hands in his coat pockets, eyes calm beneath the storm. The doors closed. The bus pulled away, its red taillights fading into the mist. Cathy sat near the window, watching his silhouette disappear into the blur. The city rolled by in streaks of gray and gold, and for the first time in years, she felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was the beginning of light. The rain had softened to a mist by the time they reached the edge of the parking lot. The world smelled of wet earth and gasoline, the kind of scent that clings to the skin long after the storm has passed. Owen stopped beside an old pickup truck, the kind that looked like it had lived through more stories than it could ever tell. Its paint was faded, the metal freckled with rust, yet it gleamed faintly beneath the streetlight. It didn't match him, not the clean lines of his coat or the quiet composure in his eyes. But somehow, it fit the moment perfectly. Cathy stood a few steps away, her breath visible in the cool air. She didn't know whether to thank him again or simply leave before her pride cracked open. The grocery bags were growing heavier by the minute, but the weight of uncertainty was worse. She had learned to read kindness carefully. Sometimes it was real. Sometimes it was just pity dressed in good manners. Owen leaned against the truck, watching her with that same calm presence that had silenced a room full of strangers. His voice came steady, low, the kind of tone that didn't ask for attention but earned it anyway. "I own a small diner not far from here, the Willow. We could use help keeping the books straight. If you're good with numbers, it might be something to think about." Cathy blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. A diner. A job. For a moment she wondered if this was just another way of helping, a softer version of the same charity she'd spent her life avoiding. Her instinct was to refuse, to say no before the hope had time to grow. But there was something in his voice that stopped her, something that sounded like respect. She searched his face for the hidden motive, the unspoken condition. But all she saw was stillness. No performance, no savior complex. Just a man offering something simple and sincere. "Why me?" she almost asked, but the words never came. Owen reached into his coat and pulled out a small white card. His fingers brushed against hers as he handed it over, and for a second, the cold night seemed to ease. The card was plain, no flourish, no title, just his name, a number, and the words, "The Willow Diner," printed in faded ink. "Think about it," he said quietly. No pressure. Cathy nodded slowly, her mind caught between disbelief and a faint stirring of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. She tucked the card into her coat pocket, close to her heart, as if afraid the rain might wash it away. The parking lot was empty now, except for them. A streetlight flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the wet ground. Owen opened the door of his truck, the hinges creaking in protest. He gave a small nod, the kind that said goodbye without needing words. Then he climbed inside and started the engine. Cathy stood there long after the truck disappeared into the distance, the sound of it fading into the hum of the city. She looked down at the card again, tracing the ink with her thumb. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. The night was still cold, but something warm began to bloom quietly beneath her ribs. A door she didn't know she'd been waiting for had just opened. All she had to do now was decide whether to walk through it. The bell above the door sang softly as Cathy stepped inside the Willow Diner. The warmth hit her first, the smell of coffee, butter, and something sweet that lingered like comfort itself. Outside, the world was gray and unkind, but in here it glowed gold. Her fingers tightened around her bag as she took it all in. Red booths lined the walls. The floors shone with quiet care. Every table seemed to hum with stories of people who came not just to eat, but to breathe. She expected the sideways glances, the polite distance that often followed her into places she didn't belong. Instead, a woman behind the counter smiled and said her name as if she had always been expected. Cathy froze for a moment, caught off guard. "Family," the woman said simply, nodding toward the back. Owen had told them she was family. She followed the sound of soft music to the office behind the kitchen, where Owen was hunched over a ledger, pencil in hand. He looked up, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his mouth. "You came," he said quietly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Cathy set her bag down, unsure where to start. Owen slid the ledger toward her, explaining how the numbers worked, how to track inventory, how to read the story hidden between the columns. His voice was calm, his patience endless. But as the days turned into weeks, she realized the lessons went both ways. He taught her numbers. She taught him people. Under her care, the diner began to change. She noticed the man who came every Tuesday but never finished his meal and started sending him home with soup in a paper cup. She learned the favorite songs of the waitress with the tired smile and made sure they played during slow mornings. The walls began to hold laughter again, not the cruel kind that once haunted her, but the soft kind that healed. The diner became a place where stories gathered. Construction workers came in with mud on their boots. Mothers sat in the corner booth after long shifts, their babies asleep in strollers beside them. Teenagers filled the air with noise and dreams. No one left hungry, not in body or in spirit. Owen watched it happen quietly, standing behind the counter as Cathy moved through the room. There was something in the way she spoke to people, how she looked them in the eye and made them feel seen. He realized the diner had always served food, but now it was serving something greater: dignity. One night, after closing, they sat together in the booth by the window. The lights were dim, the street outside empty except for the glow of passing headlights. 2 cups of coffee sat untouched between them. The silence was easy. Cathy looked around at the diner she now helped run, her heart swelling with a feeling she could barely name. Owen studied her reflection in the glass, seeing not the woman from the grocery store, but someone transformed. "You saved this place," he said softly. Cathy shook her head. "I just gave it what it gave me." Owen smiled. Outside, the neon sign flickered in the rain, the word Willow glowing faintly against the dark. Inside, 2 souls sat across from each other at a small table for 2, quietly building something the world had almost taken from them: home. The whispers began softly, like wind against glass. At first, they lived behind closed doors and coffee cups, tucked into conversations that carried just loud enough to sting. The Willow Diner had changed, they said. It wasn't what it used to be. Owen Johnson had lost his mind, throwing away good money to feed people who couldn't pay. Helping that woman, they called her, as if Cathy's name itself was a scandal. Cathy felt the weight of those words each morning when she walked through the door. She saw them in the way certain customers turned away, in the pause before a greeting, in the hesitation of hands that used to wave. But she stood tall, her shoulders squared, her apron tied neat. The clatter of dishes, the smell of coffee, the sound of life inside these walls, these things were louder than gossip. Owen pretended not to hear it first. He focused on the grill, on the hiss of bacon and the sizzle of pancakes. Yet every whispered word seemed to find its way to him eventually. The town he had called home all his life was changing in front of him, and not everyone liked it. The Willow had become a refuge, a place where the lonely and the tired came to be fed without shame. That kind of compassion unsettled people who preferred the world to stay small and sordid. One afternoon, the unease found its voice. A man in a pressed shirt and polished boots sat at the counter, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He pointed his fork at Cathy, who was refilling a cup of coffee. "I don't eat food cooked by charity," he said, his words thick with disdain. The room fell silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Cathy froze, her hand still hovering over the coffee pot. The sting in her chest was immediate and deep. She opened her mouth to reply, but no sound came. Her eyes flickered toward Owen. He stepped out from behind the counter, untying his apron slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. The air in the diner grew heavy. Every pair of eyes followed him as he laid the apron neatly across the counter. His voice, when it came, was low but carried through every corner of the room. "I would rather lose every customer in this town," he said, "than lose my humanity." No one moved. The man at the counter shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance cracking beneath the weight of silence. Cathy stood motionless, the coffee pot trembling in her hand. Then someone at a booth near the window began to clap. Another joined, then another. The sound built until it filled the diner, washing over the shame that had hung in the air. The man at the counter muttered something under his breath and left, the bell above the door ringing like a verdict. Owen turned back toward Cathy, his expression steady, his eyes soft. Without a word, he tied his apron again and returned to the grill. The world outside might still whisper, but inside the Willow, the noise was replaced by something stronger: respect. Cathy poured another cup of coffee, her hand steadier now. The whispers could stay where they belonged, out there in the cold. In here, warmth ruled. In here, dignity was served with every meal. The afternoon sun had faded into a dull gray, washing the diner in quiet light. The air was heavy with the scent of cinnamon and coffee, the kind of warmth that made strangers linger longer than they planned. Cathy wiped down the counter, humming softly, lost in the rhythm of an ordinary day. The bell above the door rang, and for a moment, she didn't look up. She had grown used to the sound, locals coming in, regulars taking their usual seats. But then she saw her, the diamond lady. The same woman whose laughter had once cut through a supermarket like glass. She stood in the doorway now, her designer coat damp from the drizzle outside, her jewelry glinting faintly under the diner's tired fluorescent lights. But it wasn't the shine Cathy noticed. It was her eyes, red, swollen, fragile in a way that diamonds could never hide. The room seemed to hold its breath. The woman hesitated, glancing around like someone walking into a place she had long judged from afar. A few customers recognized her too. The whispers began softly, but Cathy silenced them with a single look. The woman approached the counter slowly, each step deliberate, her pride trailing behind her like a shadow. When their eyes met, the memory of that day flickered between them, the groceries, the laughter, the sting of humiliation. Cathy felt her chest tighten, not with anger, but with something heavier: pity, understanding. Time had a way of humbling even the cruel. The woman opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Her voice caught in her throat. Cathy saw her hand tremble as she reached into her purse, perhaps to order, perhaps to apologize. But before she could say a word, Cathy turned and disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, she returned carrying a single plate, a slice of warm apple pie, steam curling up like a whisper of mercy. She set it gently in front of the woman, the fork placed neatly beside it. "No charge," Cathy said, her tone calm, steady, without bitterness. The woman stared at the pie, at the kindness she had not earned. Her lips quivered, her hand lifting slightly, as if to protest, but she couldn't speak. A single tear rolled down her cheek and fell onto the counter. Cathy didn't look away. She simply stood there, quiet and unflinching, the embodiment of grace. Around them, the diner went still. Owen watched from the kitchen door, his expression unreadable but proud. The woman lowered her head, whispering something too soft for anyone to hear. Then she picked up the fork and took a small bite. It wasn't about the pie. It was about what it represented: forgiveness served warm. Cathy turned back to her work, her shoulders light, her movements sure. She didn't need to win. The moment itself was victory enough. The diamond woman sat for a long time, finishing every crumb, her tears falling quietly into her coffee cup. When she finally left, she paused at the door, looking back once more at Cathy, the woman she had once reduced to shame. This time, there was no laughter, no judgment, only the quiet acknowledgement of a debt far deeper than money could pay. And as the bell above the door rang once more, the room exhaled. Cathy smiled faintly, the air thick with something holy. Not revenge, redemption. The diner was quiet after closing, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound left alive. The chairs were turned upside down on the tables, their legs pointing toward the ceiling like prayers half finished. Owen stood near the counter, wiping down the last of the crumbs with slow, steady strokes. His reflection flickered in the dark window, the neon sign outside glowing faintly behind him. Cathy watched him for a moment from the doorway. The light above his head caught the edges of his hair, turning the moment soft and golden. He didn't notice her at first. He was humming under his breath, a tune without words, the kind that fills empty rooms with quiet peace. She walked toward him, her footsteps light on the tile. The smell of pie still lingered in the air, sweet and faint, mingling with the scent of rain that drifted through the cracks in the door. "The woman came back," Cathy said softly. Her voice carried the weight of what had just happened, the kind of weight that doesn't crush but humbles. She sat alone for an hour. She cried while she ate, said no one had ever shown her mercy before. Owen looked up, his cloth still in his hand. His eyes were calm, touched with that same stillness that had changed everything months ago in a grocery store line. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then a slow, knowing smile rose at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe that was the real payment," he said. Cathy tilted her head slightly, watching him. "Kindness repaid in kind," he added quietly. "Sometimes grace doesn't move in straight lines. It circles back when the world needs reminding." The words settled deep inside her. She felt them echo through the walls, through the smallness of the space that had become their shared world. The act he had done all those months ago was never about groceries. It wasn't about saving her. It was about giving her back something that poverty and judgment had stolen: dignity. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms, her eyes glistening with a mix of gratitude and awe. "You knew that all along, didn't you?" she said softly. Owen shook his head. "I just saw what was right in front of me." Cathy glanced around the diner, at the booths she had polished, the tables she had filled with laughter and stories. This place had become more than a business. It was a sanctuary, not for the perfect or the proud, but for the broken and the brave. She smiled, a small, tired, beautiful smile, the kind that only comes after surviving something that tried to silence you. Owen placed the cloth on the counter and straightened, his gaze resting on her. "You gave this place its soul," he said quietly. "I only gave it walls." Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady against the glass. Cathy turned toward the window, watching the drops trace patterns down the pane. "Maybe that woman wasn't the only one who needed mercy tonight," she said. "Maybe we all do." Owen nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "Mercy keeps the world breathing." They stood together in the dim light, two souls bound not by debt or duty but by something greater. The kind of quiet redemption that starts in a single act of kindness and ripples outward until the whole world feels it. And in that stillness, surrounded by the hum of a sleeping diner, Cathy finally understood what Owen had known all along. Dignity was not something given. It was something restored. The evening shimmered with life. The Willow Diner, once quiet and uncertain, now pulsed with laughter and warmth. The new sign above the door glowed softly in the twilight, the gold letters catching the reflection of the street lights. The Willow and Hearth, two names now intertwined, two stories that had once stood apart, now written side by side. Inside, the air was alive with sound. Children's giggles mixed with the soft strumming of a local guitarist in the corner. The clatter of dishes, the murmur of voices, the scent of roasted herbs and sweet pie filled the room. Every booth was full, every heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Cathy moved between tables with ease, her apron gone, replaced by a deep green dress that brushed against her knees as she walked. People called her Miss Cathy now, with affection and respect. She carried not trays, but presence. Her laughter rose above the hum of the room, the sound of a woman who had rebuilt her life one act of grace at a time. Behind the counter, Owen poured coffee, his sleeves rolled up, his face lined with quiet pride. His eyes followed Cathy as she helped an elderly man to his seat, as she handed a slice of pie to a little girl who couldn't reach the counter. Every gesture, every smile, spoke of purpose. This place was more than a diner now. It was a heartbeat. When the music softened, Owen stepped to the center of the room, holding up his glass. The crowd stilled. The air thickened with anticipation. He looked around at the faces before him, faces of strangers who had become something more. "Tonight is not about profit," he said, his voice deep and steady. "It's about people, about second chances and full plates, about the simple power of being seen." Applause rippled through the diner. Cathy felt her chest tighten, her throat ache with emotion. She turned toward him, and for the first time she didn't see the man from the grocery store who had lifted her up. She saw her equal, a partner, someone who had shared her dream and her fight, not to save her, but to walk beside her. The guitarist began to play again, the melody slow and tender. Owen crossed the room, his hand brushing hers as he passed. An unspoken thank you exchanged between two souls who understood the cost of kindness. In one corner, the diamond woman sat quietly, her head bowed in prayer before her meal. Across the room, a group of children sang along to the song, their hands sticky with syrup and joy. Every person inside carried a story, and somehow all of them had found their way here. Outside, night folded around the diner like a soft blanket. Through the windows, light spilled onto the sidewalk, golden and warm against the cold. The camera drifted back, capturing the glow from within. Cathy and Owen stood side by side, laughter caught midair, surrounded by a world they had remade. Two lives that had collided in shame and rain now stood in the glow of redemption. The sign above them flickered softly in the dark, its words a promise to anyone who passed by. The willow and hearth, a place where hunger met compassion, where broken things were made whole, where love was not spoken in grand gestures but served quietly, one plate at a time. Before you scroll away, take one small action that matters. Hit share. Because stories like this don't just inspire, they heal. And maybe, just maybe, your share will reach someone who needs to believe that compassion can still rewrite the ending. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.